excited because you said, "Oh, I attended these workshops with David back in the 90s, and I can see the connection between David Grove's work and messy visuals." And I
Right.
so and I that's just a new thought as far as I know for me. I've never heard anyone say that before, and that made me just really curious.
Oh gosh. Actually, I just pulled. Had a file in my filing cabinet folder, and I pulled it out, and I just looked. I think the first thing I ever did with him was in 1993.
Mm,
I was doing a master's in counselling in the Auckland University. So that somehow one of the lecturers had a connection with him, and he came in a couple of times actually and talked to a group of, our group, probably maybe 20 people, something like that. But I'd first come across him, and I was a social worker back probably in the late 80s. Just somehow I came across his work. I think he was working in the States then with metaphor work.
hmm
So I've always been interested in it. But um,
This is way before I'd ever heard of David Grove, so this is like
yeah,
a history lesson for me.
you're right. So in terms of the messy visuals, I mean, that's a more recent thing for me. I always remember, I think it was his partner at the time, she used to take notes with little visuals in it,
Hmm
tracking each session he did with various people.
hmm
That always really liked that because you could go back and track how the conversation had evolved.
hmm Would that be
Um,
Kai?
yeah, would be. Yes, that's
Hmm
right. Yeah, I was trying to remember her name.
Kai Davies
Uh,
Lynn.
yeah, because I guess
Now I know.
the one of the things that's always intrigued me about therapy in general is that there's all this talk. The only place it usually lands is in the therapist's notebook, and
Hmm
all that, you know, you might land somewhere, but the rest of it, it's
hmm
gone forever. And so somehow tracking it visually and having that as a record I find just really, I was fascinated by that. Um, so I guess I mean, I'd never really thought when I did that messy visuals thing, I wasn't thinking about David Grove. It was only when you responded to that article that got me thinking. Um, because when you say, and what kind of X is that X or whatever, um, it can just be something simple, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. Um, and it's something that just captures the essence of the idea, I guess. And the messy visual, the messier it is, the more I put it. Oh gosh. Okay. So when we draw a picture, if someone's talking, we draw a picture of what they're talking about, or we're trying to explain something by drawing a picture, the more perfect it is, the less human it is.
hmm
I mean, that's just, that's my, something I'd come across recently, and it just really resonated with me, because if it's really messy, then people can make it mean what they want.
hmm
And if clean languages is putting in as little as possible. I mean, a visual is always taking something and concretizing it, but the messier it is, I don't know, the more consistent it is, I suppose, with the principle of staying as clean as possible.
Mm. That's taking my attention in a bunch of ways at once. But one of the ways it's going is the clean language questions are not messy at all.
No,
They're
sure.
open, but they're very not messy.
Yep.
But I suppose the question that arises for me is when you're talking about messy visuals, what kind of messy is that messy? So for you, what kind of messy is the messy of a messy visual?
What kind of messy is that messy? Oh gosh. Um, Actually, the first word that came up for me was forgiving. I
Mm.
don't know where that came from, but that's what um, came up, and then I'm thinking, oh, it's for giving. Um, um, and then that's something about some sort of recognition. Yeah, I suppose it does risk getting into, oh, is it like this? Which does
Mm,
then, that's moving away from the clean language frame, I guess.
mhm. But it's for giving. And the messy, I suppose the other question is who's doing the drawing? Because
Well,
in
that's really interesting because I think most of the time with the work I'm doing, I do mainly live. I'm sort of semi-retired these days, and I do mostly live scribing. So I do all the drawing. But in theory, it's much better if people can draw for themselves.
mm,
Uh, so there's nothing to say that when you're, if even in the clean scenario, if people draw something messy to represent what it is that they're
mm,
saying.
I was
I,
go on.
I was just going to say, I remember I did a 4-day retreat with David. That would have been the late 90s. And one of the things he encouraged us to do was to draw actually. And I was trying to find it today. I must have chucked it out. But it was an image. Basically the image that came up from was of an estuary. I've always lived by the sea. I love the estuarine environment because it's a constant ebb and flow, and the edges are always changing. And it was, yeah, that was. So he encouraged us to explore those metaphors by concretizing it. And that was very impactful. And where I live now, I live on an estuary, literally at the bottom of the garden. So it was very prophetic.
Mm. And nowadays, well, by the time I got involved in David Grove's stuff, lots of people were encouraging clients and participants in workshop to draw with a clean frame around that.
Yes, yeah,
And when I first went to my first workshops with Wendy Sullivan, I was really annoyed by having to constantly draw things because I'm
yes.
not a
Well,
good
and
drawer.
that's you're not alone. I mean, because well, I was going to say that's almost universal. Most adults really struggle, and they hate being told to draw.
Yeah. And at the moment, I'm working on a. Do you know liberating structures? You probably do if you're a facilitator.
Yeah, yes, I have come. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
come across.
I'm polishing a clean-based candidate liberating structure
Oh, lovely.
in conversation with Nancy White and Keith McCandless, who are writing a new liberating structures book, and they've kindly allowed, invited this one to be the example of how a liberating structure gets polished and turned into a liberating
Right,
structure,
right.
which is
Yeah.
fun and interesting. But the
Mm,
thing is that it starts with an invitation to draw. When
right.
you are Xing at your best, you are like what?
Yes.
Or
Yep.
when you're
Yep.
working at your best, you're like what? That question's been around for quite a long time. I think it was originally Caitlin Walker's question. But the invitation is to draw. And we're trying to polish the exact wording of the sentence that we really want them to draw on a sticky note.
Right.
But it is okay if they really can't bear it, if they will just write a word or two.
Sure. Yeah, because I guess the whole thing, I mean, that was the whole thing with visual language, I guess, because words are visual language,
Mm,
a written,
yeah.
and I mean, I guess there's a continuum from the written word up through different forms of representation up to, yeah, I mean, probably photographs at the other end of the continuum of, your photographs of reality, but there's everything, everything in between. But
Yeah.
yes, I guess that, yeah, because often the people's first response when you ask them to draw is they just freeze, and I guess part of it is finding a way of making that suggestion that gets people over that
And I'm
that
wondering if
initial
if
reluctance.
if the phrase messy is better.
Well, actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you say, like, just do a messy little picture. If you,
Mm,
or because if you say draw a picture, and I guess, if you explored even that using clean. So what sort of picture is a picture like that? Oh, it's something that looks like X, you know.
mm,
Um, whereas, and there's a sense that it has to look like something.
mm.
Whereas if you say just draw a messy picture, that takes that away
I
because it's profoundly different, really.
mm. Nancy wants to use the word sketch, and I want to use the word draw. For me, sketch is much more formal than draw.
Oh gosh, that's interesting, isn't it? um, gosh, uh, hmm. Sketch. I suppose draw does. Yeah, perhaps there is a bit more of a formality about drawing as
Mm,
opposed to sketching. That sketchy is a sketch is rough,
yeah.
whereas the drawing can tend to be more, what's the word, tidy.
Mm,
Possibly, I don't. That's where messy's quite good, isn't it? Because
yeah.
it's sort of somewhere in between. You can just do a messy drawing or a messy sketch. It kind of outframes both of them because it's just going to be either one can be messy and rough.
Mm,
Uh, but that's all you need to do. That's good enough.
mm. And when you as a facilitator are drawing the messy drawing, the messy has this characteristic of allowing ambiguity.
Yeah, well, it does because the there's this thing I came across recently that says basically in terms when you're drawing something, just because the way the brain works, that it only needs to approximate, the thing you're trying to convey by it only needs to be 20%. Like it's not 100%, like 100% likeness is a perfect, whatever you're
Mm,
drawing looks real, it looks like that thing. That's
yeah.
perfect. There's no ambiguity.
Mm,
Whereas the mind starts as soon as you start drawing something and you say what it is that you're drawing, then it only has to approximate it because even if you draw a person, I don't know if you've come across Dan Rome's work.
no.
He's massive in the visual communication field, actually. But one of the things he says is just draw a circle and a little circle and name it.
Mm,
It's a person, but it's. I mean, you don't even have to draw a stick figure. You can just draw a circle and put a name in it. That's sufficient to be then now it's recognizable as a person. Yeah, and then you get into
mm,
you can get into all sorts of elaborate drawings of people, but so that 20% is enough ambiguity there, but if the person knows what it is you're trying, you say what you're trying, what it is, then that's often enough. And I mean, there's some people will get caught up, oh, that doesn't look like X, but as a general rule, that doesn't happen.
mm. The Lego Serious Play facilitators have a thing they do where they hold up a white Lego brick and say this is a polar bear.
Right.
Same kind of idea. I mean, a
It's
white Lego brick shares nothing
yeah,
with a polar bear apart from the color white.
from the color, but but it represents, it's just a representation and people get it. People just
Mm,
instinctively get it.
because metaphor is part of the way humans work.
Exactly,
One thing
exactly.
standing
Just
for
think
another
of
thing is just the way it works.
I mean, that's how our brain naturally works, and I guess how we communicate a lot of the time.
Mm.
I think one of the worst things, I mean, I find these days is now with AI creating all these images, I mean, you can instruct it to do something rough. Even when I do that, it still comes out pretty good. It's not
Mm.
messy, general rule. But there's a tendency, people go for quite elaborate colored images and they just, yeah, that, yeah, I hate them. Um, but yeah, so we kind of captured by that thing of something that looks really nice.
Mm.
Uh, but there's something lost in that compared, I think, to a messy drawing.
Yeah,
That,
that polishedness is just,
yes, yeah,
and I don't know whether it's still as noticeable. It certainly was when AI images first came out, was that all females were insanely sexualized.
right.
Because the machines have been fed on millions and millions of porn
Well, yeah,
pictures.
yeah. I mean, it is getting way better. I mean, I have a use it occasionally. I just say, oh, I wonder what it'll come up with. And I've been occasionally I'll get something that I would think, oh yeah, I could adapt that. Most of the time, it doesn't land anywhere near what I
Mm.
was hoping for, but it is getting way better. There's no doubt about that, and a lot of it's in the prompting.
Mm.
And sometimes you've got to do very elaborate prompting to really get it going in the right direction.
Yeah. And asking, I wrote a few posts about this a little while ago about how using clean language questions to ask yourself about your prompt makes your prompt a great deal better.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because one of the things that the AI can't seem to get its head round, and this is a whole other project for me, is the AI can't get its head round the fact that it needs to ask you questions. It is
Right.
possible to get it to, but it's really not its natural mode.
Right. Yeah, I suppose once again, I suppose you could craft some prompts that get it to
Mm.
question. But yeah, it is interesting because I think there's an assumption that you're there to ask it because it knows everything.
Yeah.
And so, and it just assumes it knows what you mean.
Mm. And it hardly ever does,
Um,
of course.
and that's no, well, that's yeah. I mean, it's sometimes it's quite astounding what it does come back with, but yeah. But I was thinking, just in terms of the messy drawing and using clean language, because one of drawing concrete things is pretty straightforward. I mean, it does,
Mm.
I mean, some things are awkward to draw. I mean, I still don't draw people that look like people. Because I'm not an artist. So
Mm.
anyway, but abstract concepts are the biggest challenge usually to say, and just by using clean questions on yourself. I mean, I think I tend to do it intuitively, but if you get stuck, it's a really good way
Mm.
of prompting yourself, and you never quite know what's going to come out when you ask yourself that question.
Am I allowed to admit at this point that on those visuals that started this conversation actually came out of a conversation with the AI? I said, how can I represent this concept given my level of visual of drawing
Actually, I
skills?
have to say, I was surprised at that because they were so that they look so natural. I would have if I'd have put money on that you'd just done it
Oh, I
yourself.
drew them. I drew
Yeah.
them,
Oh, you got
but
the idea from
got
them
the idea
from it.
from them.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. So, but that's fine. I think that using it to get some ideas is great, and then just have it just hand drawing it yourself then you've got a messy drawing, even though
Mm.
AI gave you the idea of what to draw. But that's perfectly
Yeah. And it started off with, oh, well, draw a person with their head on one side, holding their ear.
yeah.
No.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes it's you try to reduce those things down to the least degree of complexity.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I mean that can be challenging because AI usually does make things more complex than they need to be.
Mm. Yeah, they don't. And so one of the projects I'm involved in the long run, and we're seeking funding at the moment. We're going to create um, an AI based tool which does coach people using clean language, but it's not there yet. We've got to do a bunch of work on it, because there are
Right.
a lot of people who use clean language on themselves, and a few people have got AI to ask them clean language questions. But as yet, there are some points where we don't think the AI can work safely. We need to teach it to do that.
Right. Yeah, but I guess, um, yeah, I guess the basic structure of clean language is there is a structure to it, isn't there? That,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and so, um, I guess that just part of me is just thinking, so, I mean, part of, I guess, being good at clean too is just picking up on nuances and stuff like that. But that's, I guess that's at the more, advanced end, but just at a
Yeah.
basic level, you can ask I was going to say the formulaic questions in response to a response that, take people to really useful places.
I mean, I do a lot of teaching of conversational clean nowadays. Teach people in the medical world to ask one or two clean questions before leaping to the assumption that they know what the person's talking about. And
Yes.
just that shift to actually change whether they think they know what the person has just said. It doesn't matter whether they ask the question, changing the who's got the information here. Is it you or is it the person who you're helping? And it's
Well,
them.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so democratizing, isn't it? And in the sense that people become an active player as
Mm,
opposed to a patient. I mean, with someone who just has all that knowledge and, yeah,
yeah.
just,
So conversational clean, I think, is a relatively new-ish thing that David wouldn't have been talking about when you bumped into him. Is that right? Or were
look,
people talking about
he
conversational
was
clean
he
then?
was in such he was just every time he'd come up with something new,
Mm,
he was, oh gosh, there was, look, I can't look. I've got all the notes actually. I'll have to
mm,
go back, reread them all. Um, but he was exploring, I suppose, some of the stuff around, just emergent knowledge, and um, the early stuff was, exploring clean and basically, essentially going back to the past and accessing resources. And
mm,
I remember I've got an extensive background in NLP, and so I was always interested in. I mean, because one of the things about that is there's usually a structure to everything. So I kind
mm,
of came at clean language a little bit of thinking, oh, what's the structure of this? Because you can actually, you can kind of map it a little bit. But I think I offered to be a demo subject, and he asked me to do something, but I don't know if you've ever come across a thing called timeline therapy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So basically, essentially, take yourself above your historical timeline, you go back and
Hmm.
access resources, and then you bring that back through your history. And I actually, in terms of what he was doing, because I already knew to do that, it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't, I inserted my own knowledge into it to incorporate it. But um, yeah, he found that really fascinating. Just, it was just, and he'd pick up on stuff and then experiment with taking things in different directions. And it was always really exciting to know, gosh, what's, where, where's it landed
Yeah.
now?
What was your understanding of David's relationship with NLP?
I didn't, oh gosh, I don't know if I ever really talked to them about it. Look, I may have. I was a
Mm,
real NLP, it was a big fan, back in those times, back in the early 90s. I mean, I did my NLP trainers training in the early 90s. So I honestly can't remember. I just wish I had. I wish, just in hindsight, a wonderful thing. One of the things, there's another NLP guy. I remember we had David wasn't involved, but it was the whole notion that actually clean was non-directional in the sense that actually this colleague named Michael Hall. I don't know if you ever come across him.
Yeah, yeah,
He developed
yeah. I know him. Yeah,
neurosemantic.
yeah.
Anyway, his take, just this would have been in the late 90s probably, maybe early 2000. His take was that even there's no such thing as a clean question, because even particularly when you say where does something come from, that is
Great big
directional.
assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just that's more about playing semantics, really.
Mm,
But I know that David had a Ericksonian hypnosis
mm,
background, and a lot of NLP came out of Erickson's work.
mm.
A lot of the patterns were actually developed out of Erickson's work, and
Yeah.
there, I guess the Milton model of language and the meta model of language all came
Mm,
out of his stuff.
yeah. My understanding was that David had done the NLP at least up to master's level, master prac level with Bandler and Grinder,
Right.
but then had a big falling out with them and went off to do his own thing, and would probably, if asked, have said this is nothing to do with NLP at the time when you.
Right. It's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, look, I don't know. If I was to guess why that might have been, I mean, they were very, even though NLP is about, you're doing it with people, actually, the way they practiced it, particularly Richard, he was
Mm,
doing it to people, and
yeah.
I can imagine that would have grated,
Mm,
because
yeah.
that's so out of, that just doesn't align with a clean approach.
Yeah. And a clean approach, in my opinion, actually works better than doing it to people. When you've got two people's, if you're doing it with someone, you've got two people's energy.
And you're using their own, yeah, I mean, yes. And I guess you're, rather than figuring, oh, I need to do a swish pattern with them to
Mm,
whatever you're going to do. You're deciding what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and all the rest of it. Whereas with clean, the person goes back and finds their own resource. You don't have to suggest what the
mm,
resource is. So it's a much more empowering and liberating sort of
mm.
approach.
But of course, there's no such thing as completely clean. So if you go to
No,
a session with a client clutching a pile of post-it notes and nicely colored pens and put them on the table between you, there's a great big assumption there.
oh,
It's just the kit you take with you to a
well,
session.
exactly. Yes, yeah, yeah.
The space
It's
you have the conversation in, the tool,
yes,
and that was when the whole COVID thing kicked off and everything went online. I was getting already really interested in how conversations on Zoom or on whatever tool were different from conversations in the room, and how could you bring any of the assumptions that you wanted to bring into Zoom when you you want the client to be able to physically move, experience their physical body, do their own drawing and all that kind of thing. What was it reasonable to say to people? Can you tell people to bring sticky notes and felt pens to their own
right, right. Yes,
sessions,
yep,
for example? And I concluded you could. You said to people,
yes, yep.
you're going to need.
Yeah, and I think that's just so I guess the main thing is, like, it's almost like no surprises, isn't it? I
Mm,
mean, a part of it is, I suppose, part of it is the pre-framing
yeah.
of, explaining, look, when we work together, whatever, however you explain it, it pre-frames it, so it doesn't kind of all of a sudden they get confronted with,
Mm,
and yeah, I guess it's that element where you stop and freeze momentarily or for
mm.
longer.
Yeah. If people expect it and they expect it. Yeah, it makes sense. Back to the University of Auckland.
Right.
What was David doing there? He was just visiting lecturer on a counselling
Yeah,
course.
he no, well, he because he would come back to New Zealand, I think, to see family.
Yeah.
And so what happened was his sister, um, she would organize workshops. A couple of times she organized retreats, and other times there was workshops. And so she would organize a schedule for him.
Mm.
And somehow somebody on the university staff knew her and was able to somehow get him to just come and do this. It was 2 or 3 hours, I suppose. He just popped in, and here's this amazing guy. It was fantastic, actually. It was just so cool. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But so his sister would organize his schedule, and then he would just come and they'd be spaced out, and he'd do these different events. They weren't massive. I mean, I think at one of the retreats I did, there was a maximum of 6 people. It was 3 or 4
Hmm.
days. Um, and there was other workshops. They were never really massive events,
And
but
retreats where he was working with you in turn as client or different to that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So part of it was some of it was as a group, and he'd be talking about, I guess, I guess theorizing a little bit, and maybe doing some demos.
Mm.
Just it was usually live demos,
Yeah.
um, and then we had time to work on our own, and he would do one-on-one sessions. So it was pretty stunning to have the
Mm.
opportunity to do that.
Mm. And at that time you were training to become a counsellor.
Yeah, I mean, I'd got into NLP when I was a social worker, and then I decided that I was more interested in the therapy side of things than the social work
Hmm.
side of things. So I think by the time I did a master's in counselling, I think by the time I did that, I was already a certified NLP trainer and had a sort of
Hmm.
more private therapy practice anyway. Um, but yeah, it just all sort of fitted together. But I did that for a few years, and then in the late 1990s, I ended up managing social service. I ended up in management, doing other things. I still did a lot of private therapy type stuff on the side. I mean, I have to confess, I didn't really incorporate much clean in what I did. I I did other things, but it always was in the background.
Mm.
And yeah, it was always in the background, but I certainly wasn't a pure clean practitioner.
When it was in the background, what difference did that make?
Um, I think, I suppose it's that thing of don't assume you know what, um, when they say something that you know what they mean.
Mm.
Um, and that's meant that, and NLP's like that as well. I mean,
Mm.
it's different, but you don't take something at face value. You use the meta model approach, to kind of explore
Mm.
generalizations and distortion, all of that sort of stuff. Um, so it challenges assumptions and presuppositions.
Mm.
Um, and so but clean was kind of an elegant way of asking. Um, it wasn't it was more invitational than firing off a meta model question. Just was a little bit more that they are a bit more incisive, whereas a clean question is invitational. Like
Mm.
it's almost like help me understand. It's got
Mm.
that sort of tone to it.
I'm curious that there are a couple of schools of thought about whether clean belongs in NLP or is different from. So in the UK, as I understand it, one organization believes that clean is part of NLP, and another organization believes that it is different and has therefore excluded NLP clean practitioners from its membership.
Oh, okay.
And I just wondered, What's your view on on that?
I, gosh, oh gosh, I, I think it's look, I think there's to me just through my own personal experience, I see there's a lot of overlap. Like I think I can use some of the ways of thinking that of NLP in terms of modeling systems and structure and process, modeling process. Um, I can see that a lot of what happens in clean, you could say, oh, that's like X in NLP.
Hmm.
But NLP is a little bit more, I was going to say, oh gosh, I'm not sure if prescriptive is the word, but it's, yeah, it's, I would put clean as related to, but I'm not sure that it's a part of. But there is, I think there are overlaps, and yeah, that are there.
It's really interesting. And the work that Penny Tompkins and James Lawley did, which was from an NLP perspective, modeling what David Grove was doing. So it is an NLP modeling project, and therefore brings clean into the NLP trail of techniques.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
that
Well,
is
I suppose, yeah.
logical, but it
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think what the definition of NLP is. And one of the things, I can't even remember the start of it, but one of those, and has a trail of techniques. Um, so yeah, you could say that. Look, I haven't, to be quite honest, I haven't been thinking about those
no,
things for quite
no.
a while. So, um, but yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what David would say. If they, yeah.
Well,
I mean, who
I,
defines it?
mm,
Um,
I interviewed David um, at the NLP conference in Regent's College, the first time I had a proper conversation with him. And it was the first time he'd been back to an NLP event since he'd walked away from his training, was what he
right.
said to me. I've since um, been led to understand that wasn't literally true. He had a good friend in America and he taught on that friend's NLP trainings for all the time he was saying he had nothing to do with
Oh,
NLP.
really? Oh, what a
Yeah.
hoot. Oh, gosh.
That's actually the friend whose house he was at when he died.
Okay.
Um, so there's a close relationship there. Of course, Penny and James came at the whole thing from an NLP point of view.
Right. Yep. Yep.
So that was a connection. Um, and on that NLP conference where David was the sort of headline speaker, he was the Saturday night speaker. Um, there were lots of conversations about does clean belong in or is it just
Mm-mm-mm.
associated with? But everybody was excited by what he was doing. Um, and it really didn't matter whether it was defined as part of
No, I
or
mean, I think
separate
that's the
from.
thing. It is exciting, and it's something to get excited about,
Yeah.
and I guess that then whether it's in or out is not really the question. So, like, this is something very cool and amazing.
Mm.
Um, but do we really have to get into labeling it and categorize? But that's all. I mean, let's face it. Look, there's still, I don't know, probably the NLP wars are still going on. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I imagine so.
so
But but one of the reasons it does seem to matter is the more that clean is used in different contexts, the more people can go, well, that's part of NLP, therefore I don't need to take any notice of it. Because
yeah, I
NLP
think
is
that
just
funny
a,
you should say. I was just thinking that very thing, that actually it's far better to be not associated because of the history of NLP,
mm,
a lot of which is really pejorative and misinformed a lot of the time.
yeah.
But it has been used, and still is being used, in a very manipulative ways.
Mm,
Whereas clean comes from a clean place. It hasn't got that. It's not tainted in
mm,
the same. in the same way.
However, if you want to influence somebody to change in a way that will benefit them and potentially you as well, but in a way that will benefit them, then clean is more effective as a tool for influence than not being clean. If you find out what they actually want, you're in a much stronger position to say, oh,
Well,
can
yeah, I
I
mean,
help them get that or not?
yeah, and I mean, NLP is basically, it's always about what's their, theoretically, it's about what's their
Mm,
outcome.
mm,
Um, but I think that it, that outcome is usually nowhere. No, yeah. It's always, oh, okay, we know what your outcome is, so well, here's a technique that'll get you the outcome,
yeah.
as opposed to clean goes a lot deeper in terms of, you know, what that's about and what its origin
Mm,
is, et cetera, et
mm,
cetera.
mm. Oh, there's such a lot to think about. And this has been so interesting. My head is now about to explode. Is there anything else we should talk about?
I guess, look, I guess it's just how yeah, I mean, I really appreciated you picking up on the messy drawing thing. And then, look, I suppose for me, one of the things I suppose, like, yeah, because I promote visual thinking and, you know, messy drawing as a way of, I mean, the thing that really drives me is leveling a playing field. That and even if I'm doing the drawing, it basically you can, you know, ideally people draw for themselves, but often people won't, or
Mm,
it's just it's too far. But in terms of getting clarity and shared meaning in a messy drawing, I find that's a very liberating uh, way of making sure that people can meaningfully participate, and that their knowledge and understanding is just as important as mine. You know,
mm,
so um, that it's that side, but yeah. And so I encourage people to do this, and people love the idea, but most people won't take the next step. And what
mm,
was so lovely was that you did. Because it's, you know, I mean, I don't know, probably that article, I don't know, hasn't had a huge number of views, but, you know, let's say there's 100+ people have viewed it. I would say you might be the only person who's gone out and attempted a messy drawing. You know, some people say, oh, that's really
mm,
interesting.
mm,
But that's as far as it goes. And so there's something around encouraging people and people being able to take the step to have a go
mm.
is what intrigues me, because
Yeah,
a lot of people still get caught on, I can't draw, so they don't start.
yeah.
But our little conversation at the beginning about framing it as messy drawings, there's something permissive about that
Mm.
that is very useful and helpful.
I'm now curious, what are so of course, what's the first step to actually doing it? Our assumption is that people thinking they can't draw might be the big barrier. But actually, there might be another barrier, which is how do I get this drawing from this piece of paper on my desk onto the computer?
Yeah, there is
There are other places that could be the barrier.
yeah, no, so that's a
That's one for you
so
to write about
yeah,
if you've
yeah, no,
got.
no, that's actually really interesting. And I'll just make a note of that, but get it on to the because these days you just assume that people know you can just, you know, take a photograph of it or do whatever, you'll scan it
Mm,
or whatever and digitize it. But I mean, for a lot of people, that's probably there's that. The other thing is sometimes, I mean, you were like, to a certain extent, there's an element of courageousness because you've got a big readership and you're putting your, you know, messiness on public display. Actually,
mm.
that's, you know, there's did you think of your reputation when you did that? I mean, but there is, you know, I
Well,
think
yes,
there's,
I
yeah,
did, and I thought you were right. And I thought that if I did it, people would stop scrolling and would read what I wrote. So yes, I did think about my reputation. I thought that it would be enhanced rather than reduced.
Right. That's great because I think that is a barrier. I mean, I'm just assuming, but I think for a lot of people that is a bit of a struggle when they look and see online all this perfection,
Mm,
and you can get, and you compare yourself with that. But so providing some steps,
mm.
um, and you can envisage actually just saying to people, look, walk it let's walk you through the steps of doing some messy drawings and then how you digitize it, and then think about how you share it and
Mm,
frame it when you publish it. I
mm.
mean, anyway, there's obviously there's some interesting, useful stuff in there.
Can I throw one more barrier into the whole mixture?
Sure.
So, an article that I had read just before I read yours was about how if you draw people as with round heads with no hair and you don't shade that in, then you're actually drawing bald white men.
Right.
Now, you can see where she's coming from.
Oh, look, I think and I mean, I don't do any features, and I'm just doing black and white,
Mm,
drawings. And so, but that's really interesting. There's a whole lot of stuff that how would people in different cultures want to see themselves represented?
mm.
Um, and so, yeah, that's,
And if I can no longer represent people as just a circle, oh God, how complicated is it all going to get?
yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I suppose that becomes a conversation then, doesn't it?
mm,
So what are some, yeah, it's just, I guess, is to explore that with people and find out what is it that can work. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's very fraught territory.
yes. Mm,
And I guess that is one of the problems. I mean, when you're part of the mainstream culture,
mm,
how much even even though like in New Zealand, which I'm trying to work as a bicultural way as possible, but just even that is when it comes to simple line drawings, what are you communicating? What's the meta
mm,
message that so I guess part of it, I suppose, ultimately, if you're drawing people and you're representing someone, it's the real question is, can somebody see them relate to that in a way that, oh yeah, I can see myself on that.
mm.
Um, and yeah, what does it take?
Yeah, how messy can we be in order to um, include everybody? And is it true that the messier, the more inclusive?
What a great question.
Mm.
Um,
Because if we encourage people to draw messily, then we're definitely encouraging them to, well, we're including as many people as possible in this interesting activity of drawing. But, you know, does it, if people draw messily, they're going to represent fat people as big circles and thin
well,
people.
there's
Yeah,
that's
and is that going to offend somebody?
look, I suppose the potential's always there
Mm,
that I suppose in the end, you wouldn't draw a person because you can't, if you're just drawing one figure
mm.
that's representing, a generic person, what, gosh, yeah, well, maybe there's no such thing.
Mm,
But yeah, mate, and once again, it could be, I suppose it would depend on your audience.
mm.
I mean, if you're going out to the world, then it's like, oh my goodness, how many bases do you have to cover? If you know you're working with a particular audience, it's probably a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Gosh, that's put me right off now. But yeah, there's all those assumptions and yeah, that are inherent in it. But I suppose the only other thing is to be open to is to ask for feedback.
Mm.
And look, a piece I don't know if you've come across. There's an approach called PATH, Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. It's a visual planning
I haven't
process
done that, no.
that they it came out of the inclusion movement in the Canada, or not sure it was Canada or the States, but anyway, in North America. And that starts off with getting people to explore their future. So what's the dream life? And it's all done with little pictures and some
Mm.
words, but gosh, why now I've lost my now I've lost my thread. Why did I go there? Oh, that's right. And one of the ways, the person who's usually you have a facilitator who's asking the questions, and
Mm.
you have someone who's doing the drawing. But one of the things they do is say, "Oh, what would you like me to draw for that?"
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes they say, "Oh, you just draw something, I don't care." But there is that thing of, but once again, it's the clean. So a person would be like what? So there are ways you could do that, although that can, once again, that would interrupt the flow as well. Yeah, but it is a way of at least getting people to contribute. If they're not
Mm.
drawing themselves and you're doing it, is it something like this? Um, Anything else about, yeah, and
Yeah.
there are ways you could build that in.
So is planning alternatives futures with hope, is that something you would draw for? Have you done visual
I have
facilitation?
done, look, I haven't been formally trained in it. I mean, I've done a variation of it based on that model.
Mm.
Essentially, it starts off with the person and a group of people who are that person's supporters, family supporter and supporters.
Mm.
And it's not just the the person who the path is about. It's not just their dream for the future. It incorporates everybody's dream
Mm.
about their life. So it's a community dream based
Mm.
around the you know the focused person's dream, and then everybody else's contribution to that. Because often they can add things that the person hadn't thought of themselves,
Mm.
things they know about them, and yeah. So it's a very cool So you build the dream, work backwards, start working backwards. So let's say the dream is 2 years, then you go 18 months, 1 year, and then you go back to now, and then you start
Mm.
building from now to get there, and you build, basically go from now to that, and it's a very cool, highly visual.
Mm.
The other thing, I suppose, about working visually is that I like about it, and from the neuroscience point of view, is it's externalizing. It externalizes. So now people have got perspective, and they're not
Mm.
associated into,
Yeah.
particularly it's a problem. That
Mm.
it's out there, and so everybody's got this distance and perspective, and there's something quite powerful about that as well.
Yeah. We can talk about it rather than about
Yes, it's about you. So you start
everybody
talking
pointing at
about
you.
it or that as opposed to this,
Mm.
because what's this thing you're dealing with
Yeah.
is associate you into it. Tell me
Mm.
about that.
Did you ever do
As
pronounscapes with David?
no, I
So,
didn't come.
so it was the thing, one of the things he was doing on this conference where I first saw him. He had a person draw an outline of a person on the board because it was a demonstration. And then he would say, And when you hear I, whereabouts is your I? Draw that on there. And the person would
Mm-hmm.
mark on the chart whereabouts
Yes.
they
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
I is. And then me, and then myself, and then their name. And these things would be in different places
Wow. Yeah.
in and around the person. And it seems to me that if different pronouns can live in such different places in and around a person, then the problem can live somewhere different. And the solution will be some everything has a location.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when you start to draw, then it becomes much easier to work out what's where.
Well, yeah, there's something about locating that all of a sudden, right. And then, yeah, there is something. I was just thinking about the pronouns. Like one of the NLP trainings I did was in Hawaii. Oh gosh. Anyway, that was in whenever it was.
Mm,
It was in the early 90s. And the we the guy was Tad James was the
mm-hmm,
trainer. Anyway, there was a hula master called George Naopi who he used to get to come in and we would talk about huna, that's
mm-hmm, yeah.
the Hawaiian sort of spiritual practices. And one of the things he was saying is that essentially trauma causes blockages in the nervous system. And
Mm-hmm,
I was just thinking in terms of if our pronoun, it's our I, our me, our my, and myself, and my name not are not in alignment.
mm-hmm,
And I'm going to, and so part of this and part of I think what hula is about is, and the hunu approach is actually getting clearing the blockages so all those things are lined up. And you just said, and then mana, which is the spiritual, I guess the life force. Mana flows up through the ground, up through your body when it's fully aligned, and comes out the crown of your head and falls like a rain of blessings around you. And I was just thinking, wow, that is, um, and in a sense, I think that's what any good therapy does is it
mm,
get it gets those blockages, opens the channels. And I think that's, it makes me think of David's work, where you go and find that resource and bring it back in,
mm,
and some sort of clearing that happens with it,
mm.
so that life force can flow. But that's always stuck with me actually. Um, it's just a rain of blessings around us. God, how powerful is that? That's kind
Yeah,
of
very handy.
very. Anyways, but but there's just one other. Michael Grinder, I think he's John Grinder's brother. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's an education. His stuff is wonderful. But
Stuff
one
with
of the things
cats and dogs amongst other stuff.
that's one
Yeah.
of the things.
But that's
The
the
thing
guy
I
we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, also he's very good in he did a thing called how to not get shot, how to deliver bad news, but you do it visually.
Mm,
But one of the things he talked about, and this relates to the medical side, going back to the medical side of things and hospitals and stuff, is how when doctors deliver a diagnosis, his suggestion is that you say, okay, so look, thanks for coming in. We've finally, we've got the test results. And what the doctor does is goes to, either draws a picture or shows that and says, so what we've found is that there is a cancer here or there in your
mm,
body.
mm,
And there's something about, so now it's externalized and it's located in a place as opposed to, well, look, unfortunately, you've got a cancer diagnosis.
mm.
Or you've got bowel cancer, but it becomes totalizing.
Yeah.
And so by going visual and external, it then becomes, and there is an emotional distance that
Mm.
creates as well. And I've always thought that is very cool, but I doubt if that happens very often.
I doubt if it happens at all, but yeah,
But
it
there's
does
though that's
definitely
where
makes a lot
this
of
sort
sense.
of even a messy drawing with a little, X marks the
Yeah,
spot, how powerful that could be to communicate something so, I don't know, life altering, I
yeah,
guess. Mm,
important stuff. Now we're at the
yeah.
end of our time, and it's late
Yes,
for
yes,
you.
of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for this conversation. Is there
Oh,
anything we've talked about that you would not want to be made public in a YouTube video?
not really. I mean, I look if I saw it, I probably thought, oh my God, you do, don't you?
Yeah.
But look, it's been a really interesting conversation, and it's I mean, it's been really useful just for even clarifying some of my own thinking about things. So really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And I've really enjoyed it. Really appreciate everything you've shared, and I want other people to hear it. So I'm sort of going. I'll just top and tail it and stick it on YouTube if you don't mind.
Right. Okay, great. And yeah, let's see how the messiness proceeds.
Thank you very much indeed. Talk
Okay.
to you again
Bye
sometime.
now.
Cheers.
Yes,
Bye
see
bye.
you. Bye now.